Welcome to all our viewers. Today we're here at Ararat Park Hyatt Hotel and we'll be talking to Nikol Pashinian, the Prime Minister of Armenia, who visited Sochi a month ago and is now in the Russian capital. Welcome to Moscow, Mr. Pashinian.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to start by asking you this. Since you're visiting Russia, does that mean those who feared our countries would grow apart were wrong?
Yes, of course. Even now, many people say so. And there are many publications in the Russian media where authors don't seem to quite grasp what's happened and what is happening in Armenia. There are forces who want to paint it in a different light. They want to make it look like anti-Russian political forces have come to power in Armenia. But as I keep saying, there was no geopolitical or foreign policy-related dimension to the Armenian Revolution. And as I keep saying, there was no geopolitical plot. It was a purely internal process that had to do only with Armenia. It's important to emphasize that. And we say that this process will not result in a foreign policy U-turn. Why do we say that? Because our people, the people who made the revolution happen, had no problem with Armenia's foreign policy. So they had no demands in terms of foreign policy. And we, the government, represent the people who started the revolution and prevailed. So we must act within the limits and demands of this political process, this velvet revolution. So I want to say yes, those who said the political changes in Armenia will lead to problems in Armenian-Russian relations were wrong. They've always been wrong, and they always will be wrong, if they stick to this point of view.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you say that not only to Russian journalists, but in the course of official meetings as well, right? I have a question about that. Do your counterparts hear you and believe you? And tell us about how your personal relationship with President Vladimir Putin is developing.
I think we have a very good, straightforward kind of communication. It's been like that from minute one. I can tell you that our relationship is the kind that has no dark corners. We discuss everything openly, we put forward all the questions directly and answer them directly. Mr. Putin is this sort of person. As far as I understand, he's very comfortable with this kind of communication, and, to be honest, so am I. So we communicate in a straightforward way, not leaving any dark corners. What do I mean by dark corners? It's very important that everything in our relations is clear, apparent and genuine. It doesn't mean that we'll have no issues whatsoever. What it does mean is that we will have frank discussions about all those issues without resorting to any tricks or political maneuvers, which I think is very good. I can assure you that our relations are developing in a fast and constructive way.
What's the most pressing issue at the moment?
Truth be told, we have no such issues right now, but Russia and Armenia are sovereign states. In general, I think, in many aspects, the interests of our countries align. But there could be some areas or issues on which we might disagree. I believe it's very important to maintain the atmosphere we have right now, and I hope that's the atmosphere in which we will be discussing any issues we might have in the future. I think we will be able to come to an agreement.
Let's talk about natural gas, which, as I understand, is one of the issues we have. On the one hand, you said that people in Armenia don't feel that Russian natural gas is cheap.
Yes, but we discussed it and came to the conclusion that it's a domestic issue for us. Because yes, Armenia gets cheap natural gas from Russia at the border. But by the time it's delivered to the customers, the price has doubled. That's a domestic issue we have to figure out and resolve within Armenia, and it has nothing to do with our relations with Russia.
So as for natural gas supplies from Russia, you're not going to renegotiate the price, and you haven't discussed that?
Well, you know, we hope to get even cheaper gas, of course. And we need cheaper gas, even though we know we buy it at a low price set exclusively for Armenia. But we would like to have even more exclusivity in this regard. We'll be discussing these issues, of course, and I hope we will succeed.
Let's talk about your relations with the EU. You're waiting for the ratification of your partnership agreement. How soon do you expect that to happen? And how will Armenia benefit from it exactly?
The ratification process in EU countries has already begun. This agreement involves reforming Armenia's legal system, and that's been underway in Armenia for many years, I'd say 20 or even more. And of course, we'll be developing our relations with the European Union. But as I keep saying, it won't be happening at the expense of Armenian-Russian relations. And vice versa, we won't be developing Armenian-Russian relations at the expense of our relations with the EU, for example. That's our policy. We won't adhere to a policy that implies developing relations with one international partner at the expense of relations with other partners. I believe we should be reliable partners for everyone, every global actor we have ties with. Our relations should be transparent to all sides and should rely on the principle of reciprocity. We all should act in good faith. What I mean is that, for example, it should be unambiguously clear for the West what is happening between Armenia and Russia, while Russia should enjoy just the same kind of transparency when it comes to ties between Armenia and the EU. Certainly, we will continue developing our relations with the EU, US, Iran, Georgia, and other states alike, but that's not going to be done at the expense of our ties with Russia. And vice versa. What we have with Russia is not going to affect relations with any other country.
You told me that this integration process between Armenia and the West has been ongoing for some time. Will this process now gather speed or remain the same?
Well, it's not integration as such, because integration, in terms of economic cooperation, is what we work on within the Eurasian Economic Community. As for the EU, it's a process of reforming our state legislation system, and thus it cannot be called integration in its classical meaning. If you want to call it that way, then this is rather about coupling our legal frameworks. Certainly, there's an economic element to it, but it's not economic integration. It is partnership. We have a specific trade regime with them, the same kind of regime with Georgia and the US. Conventionally speaking, economic integration is what we do within the framework of the Eurasian Economic Community.
So when it comes to the EU, you object to using the term integration?
It's not that I have any objections. I simply state the fact as it is.
Prime Minister, after meeting with the Russian ambassador, you announced the beginning of a new stage in cultivating relations with Russia. So on the one hand, you say nothing changes, but on the other, you mention a new stage. What exactly will be new?
I didn't say there would be no changes. I said that we would not be shifting into reverse. I hope, and I'm almost certain, that now we will be developing our relations even more efficiently. When I say a new stage, I mean more positive, more meaningful and more productive. Also more straightforward, more candid and transparent. This is what I mentioned in the beginning, relations without any dark corners. It's not that what we all see in those corners satisfies all of us in every way. What I say is that we frankly voice our opinion and our concerns, and we should all do that. During the meeting with Vladimir Putin, we had no problems finding common ground. We settled some matters immediately and agreed to discuss others in greater detail later. Again, there were no problems encountered during the talks.
You announced entering the new stage, and as I understand, you're now satisfied with how it all started, right?
Yes, that's true. I can say for sure that now, judging by the outcomes of 2 summits, there are no political problems between Armenia and Russia.
And did you and Vladimir Putin touch upon the cooperation between Armenia and the West, the EU?
We didn't discuss it during our latest meeting, but we did talk about that in Sochi, and I've already described what kind of conversation we had.
Now, some mass media say that you might be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, and in Russia many think that you are quite popular in the West. What do you think about that opinion and the rumor I just mentioned?
Frankly speaking, I don't know whether I'm popular in the West or not. As for the Nobel Prize nomination, I learned that from the media too.
And what if it really happens and someone decides to nominate you?
All right then, it would be nice.
Regarding your anti-corruption campaign, what have you already accomplished as Prime Minister? And at what pace are you fighting it? The one you expected, or maybe you're somewhat behind or ahead of the plans?
I can say that we have put an end to corruption in Armenia.
In such a small amount of time?
Yes, in that little time we had. I can say that for sure, because all of Armenia stands against corruption these days. There might be some small occurrences, though, but these are just the remnants of the corruption we had. We will continue our fight and will eradicate them too. Really, these are simply residual effects. When there are no corruption pyramids within government structures and officials themselves behind the wheel, it means that corruption is gone. And I'm confident that this is the case with Armenia. Certainly, relapses are possible, but I believe that the work we're doing can safeguard us against that, including in the long run.
I'm somewhat surprised to see you saying with such confidence that there's no corruption in Armenia, only some residual effects. How did you do that so fast?
That's my political conviction, that the system of corruption in Armenia was run from the top echelons of power. And now that these higher echelons are no longer involved in corruption, something I can guarantee, the system of corruption that used to exist in Armenia is no longer there. There may be some remnants of it left, and we must work hard to ensure that a new system won't arise on top of the old one.
In order to ensure that corruption is gone for good, some changes are in order. Is that correct?
Certainly, but the problem is there have already been many reforms carried out in Armenia.
So the important thing is that reforms are complied with.
The quality of our legislation is quite high, including our anti-corruption laws. In fact, I'd say that our legislation is one of the best among the CIS countries. But our problem was a lack of political will, as they say. It's like we had two parallel realities. One was what is described in the laws, and the other was what was actually happening. Our main goal now is to synchronize these two realities. In other words, make it so that laws are implemented in practice. Of course, there are parts of the legislation that are unreasonable and need to be changed. We are going to reform these laws so that a lawful reality is possible, so to speak.
There have been cases within the CIS, I'm not going to cite any specific examples, when during the shift of political elites it was said that the key goal is to put the right people into the right positions. And this is a lot like what you're saying. But then people started to notice the old elites seeping back into power. And sometime after that they said nothing had really changed. How can you guarantee that your case is different? And what are you going to do to ensure that?
I think the best guarantee here is the will of the people. I'm pretty confident the people won't say nothing has changed, because it was the people's own way of thinking that changed. I believe that's an important factor that allowed for a peaceful revolution without violent clashes or a single drop of blood. The fight was inside every citizen's mind, and when the struggle is internalized, you're very unlikely to harm those around you. This is why our revolution was so peaceful and positive. It was a revolution of unity. I believe that the main outcome of our revolution was not a shift of power, but a shift in thinking. The Armenian people, the whole nation, started to think differently. This has nothing to do with the government, because it's already happened, and there won't be a return to the old ways. The people realized that their position and their views were a key factor. They realized it wasn't one single person, or even 100 people, that forged this new reality. This was our shared endeavor. We've all been involved in it. When we renounced the old, crooked reality, it just collapsed, because all this time it had been standing on our own shoulders. By refusing to support this corrupt and fake reality, we freed ourselves of this burden. I understand that purely in terms of news, in terms of information flow, it's important to say who stepped down as Prime Minister and who replaced him. But this is not the key change that took place in Armenia. It's not about who's Prime Minister. It's about the people's way of thinking, their perception of reality, their understanding of their role in the life of the country and the nation. There is never going to be a return to the old ways.
What are your relations right now with your political opponents, the Republican Party and Mr. Sargsyan?
As for Mr. Sargsyan, it's true that we live practically next door now, but we do not have any relationship as such. As for the Republican Party, it's no longer the majority party in our parliament. It's an opposition party, and it's a solid opposition.
But as far as I understand, it is going to try and make a comeback, isn't it?
But it's not a realistic prospect. They will never make a comeback. Other forces, other parties may emerge that may win an election, but this party will never be back, that's for sure. And that doesn't have anything to do with me. It's because people will never forgive them. I can guarantee that. At least that's how I feel, and I think it's true.
Speaking of your party, what are your plans? Are you planning to reform it? Are you going to run with it in the pending early parliamentary election?
Yes, I am, if you're referring to my party.
The party alliance?
No, you see, we have a party and we have an alliance. Our party is called Civil Contract, and the party alliance is called YELK, or the Way Out Alliance. Speaking of the alliance, right now we're discussing its future. As for the party, it's definitely going to develop regardless of what happens to the alliance, so the party will develop. As for the alliance, it's something we're negotiating now, and we'll arrive at a decision in due time.
On June the 1st, you said on Facebook that those who set off an artificial price hike for basic foods and want to assert the rule of lawlessness over the rule of law will feel the full weight of the law. Who were you referring to, and what did you mean by saying they will feel the full weight of the law?
I meant exactly what you just said, the context being that we became aware of some illegal activity by a number of supermarkets in Yerevan. They simultaneously raised prices for some products and it looked like a kind of sabotage. So I reacted by saying we were ready to take action to restore justice in this area. That's what it was about. In the end, these supermarkets had to pay quite a high fine because their actions were illegal.
It looks like you have no fear of your political opponents returning and claiming positions of strength in the country, in parliament perhaps. It looks like you believe that the kind of political environment that Armenia now has will not let it happen. Not now, not ever.
You see, I don't think that we need to speak in the terms of fearing anything. I'm not the kind of Prime Minister who will ever fear losing his post. I never will. I will never be afraid to lose this post, and I never consider fear a factor in my political activity. I simply do what I think I must, and what I'm sure I must do in order to serve my country and my people. And I have no fear whatsoever following this path.
You've always been with people, among people. Has anything changed in your relationship with people after you became Prime Minister? Do I understand it right that you're still trying to stay close to people?
Of course, a lot has changed because now I have to spend a lot of time in my office working. It takes up the lion's share of my time, and so my contacts with people are limited now.
What do you do when you manage to find a little time for it?
I'm trying to keep this connection alive, and I'm sure it'll stay alive.
Do people feel that this connection is still there?
I believe they do. For example, yesterday I ran a live stream on my Facebook page answering questions of other users, and it got a lot of views. 500,000, 600,000 people watched it. And that's how many people watch my live streams on average, more or less. Sometimes a lot more than that. That's why I believe this connection will stay alive. You see, our government is supported by the people. We stay in power as long as our people have trust in us. If we lose people's trust, we'll lose power pretty quickly. I firmly believe that no one has any business being in government if they have no support from the people. It makes absolutely no sense to be in a position of power without people's support. It's absurd.
Nikol Pashinian, the Prime Minister of Armenia, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you.